Buonasera, compagni. Mi chiamo Paul Mason, sono un giornalista, scrittore e attivista nel Partito del Lavoro. Sono un baritono classico, quindi la mia pronuncia italiana è ok. Ma sfortunatamente, that's all. So I'll continue in English. I speak for about half an hour. You may hear I'm suffering with a sore throat, so if you can't hear me, put your hand up. I will speak louder. I will try. Thanks to our beautiful English rain, you may not hear me. I have got some notes here on my phone. Our comrade here is taping the introduction. If anybody doesn't want to be taped, tell him. I'm fine. Tweet it, whatever. So yeah, welcome. Come in. Sit down. We're just starting. So, you asked me to talk about, is Corbynism populism? And I want to try and attack that question from two angles. What is populism and what is Corbynism? And look at the future. Everybody probably wants to talk about Brexit, so let's talk about Brexit. I am very closely involved with several groups of Labour MPs and indeed the second referendum campaign, and I do know more or less minute by minute what is going on. So let me talk first of all about what I mean by populism. It's natural that political science wanted to create a term to describe what to me looks like the breakdown of consent for the neoliberal order. For me, what is unique about neoliberalism, which is what I wrote about in my book Post-Capitalism, what is unique about neoliberalism is the way in which it tried to embody its economic logic into law and constitution in a way that all previous periods of capitalism, or if you want to be in the accumulation school, modes of accumulation, modes of regulation, all previous modes of capitalism were quite content to inherit the rule of law, the institutions as they were, and to operate a new logic in the economy. Which is the very fact that I do this when I say the economy indicates that I am a structural Marxist. I believe it is the base. Yeah? If you think about the Lisbon Treaty, if you think about the Maastricht Treaty, if you think about the WTO as it emerged, I'm old enough to remember the Uruguay round, the GATT, before the WTO exists. What you see is an attempt to embody a certain market logic into everything else. And so when this is how I think about it, in 2008, the third of three financial explosions in a single decade. Remember this. 2008 came not from the sky. It came after the Asian crisis and the dot-com crisis. And we only had 4 or 5 years of good upward swing until we get 2008. The 2008 breaks for me, it breaks neoliberalism. It breaks the logic. The logic says the market is efficient. The state should be small. The state really should abolish itself. Industrial planning ministries were abolishing themselves. And of course, Lisbon and Maastricht treaties in Europe, the WTO globally, is pushing more and more for the privatization, not simply of industries, but from what my friend Will Davis, who is a politics professor at Goldsmiths, he defines neoliberalism like this: the coercive introduction of market norms of behavior into everything. This is what it was, and then it breaks down. But the problem is, it embodied itself into all law, all constitutionality. And therefore, when people said, look, we want to nationalise things, they said, well, as long as it's a bank, that's fine. It breaks every rule, but we have to nationalise banks because unless we do, they will blow up. I remember, as a Newsnight journalist, those of you who were here in 2008, on the night that all 3 banks in Britain were being nationalised by the government, we wrote down the market capitalisation of each one from printouts. We wrote them down. What is the shares worth tonight? And it was £32 billion. And yet the government gave them 60 and kept them private. Now, all we wanted to say is, that's wrong. Let's just, if we're going to buy them at 32 billion and run them. What then happened? If you're a small business person in London, you will know this. One of them, NatWest, to save itself, almost destroyed a whole sector of small businesses. Its mission was to make them bankrupt, even while it was nationally owned. And when people said no, the problem they ran into is that the democracy, from our point of view, had been rigged in favour of neoliberalism and could not be unrigged. If you cannot vote inside the European Union for state aid, okay, you can save a bank, you can save Parmalat. You cannot say, philosophically, state aid is good, because the Constitution says no. Inside the WTO, it's the same. TRIPS is not a European thing. The Intellectual Property Treaty, it is a world treaty. And so, to the elite, and we'll come to what I mean by the elite in a minute, but the elite, it sees attempts to break free of neoliberalism as attempts to break from a homogeneous political economic system, and it therefore, I think, otherizes them as this thing called populism, which for me has a very limited usefulness. I'm quite happy, and indeed at the Oxford Union, which is a debating club in Oxford, last month I defended the idea that the left should be populist. If people want to use the word populist, I'm happy as long as I can define it, because the pejorative definition is like this. Instead of the class struggle, it's the people versus the elite. That's the first part of populist theory in political science. And because the people must have their will against the elite, they must override the rule of law, because the general will of the people cannot tolerate the rights of minorities. Okay? So that's the sort of populist theory. Cass Mudd, one of the academics who puts this forward, in Populism, a very short introduction, is an interesting introduction to that. I'm not so interested in the Henry George in the 19th century in America, all of that. I'm not so interested in the history of populism. To me, what is happening is very specific to now. So, political theorists also tell us that the populism of the right and left is different in this sense. The left says, here's the people, according to the caricature. Here's the people, there's the 1% of the elite, that's the struggle. Whereas the right always, using the classic tropes of fascism, says, here's the people, there's the elite, and the elite have used the migrants to attack the people. So right-wing populism usually has a triangle rather than a straight line, a dichotomy. It's a trichotomy. Now, I think what is happening in the world is about more than populism. It's about the breakup of consent for neoliberalism. And as Marx said, that there's an interesting thing about, I'm a Marxist, the interesting thing as a mental tool within Marxism, which is not only to ask how does the economic and the relations of production affect the culture and the ideology, but how does the past affect the present? The two things are both materialist cause and effect. And what I want to then move on to in Britain is that how did this breakdown of consent for neoliberalism manifest itself, given what is here, the structure of British society and its contradictions, and given what happened in the past. The nightmare of the past hangs over the living like the nightmare, says Marx, and it certainly does in this country. So, what is Corbynism? Now, every time I go on TV, somebody says he's a Corbynist. Okay, a friend of Jeremy Corbyn. It's actually quite strange. You are actually in Corbyn country here. You know, there's
Hamley here. This is Hamley.
Yeah.
To go to the other side of all over.
Yeah, but I have seen Corbyn people drinking in this pub. So, around this area is all Jeremy's area and Emily's area. So, I don't really think there is a thing called Corbynism. And when we look to the future of it, this is a quite troubling thing which I am working on right now. What is the future of the left in Britain? But what was the Corbyn phenomenon? Let me try and break that down a bit. Hold on a minute. Now I've lost all my notes, but let's see if I may have even deleted a note. That could have been amazing. I could make it. So the specifics of Britain. The specifics of Britain, whatever you think about what happened in Italy, and there are very close parallels. So we had in the mid-1970s a social contract engineered by the left of the labour movement with capitalism, like you did, 74, 75, I can't remember exactly, where the Communist Party, kind of agreed this wages compact. We had exactly that. It broke down in the late 70s. And when neoliberalism came to power in Britain in 1979 with Thatcher, the one thing I think it was absolutely clear, and I lived through it, was that it had decided it could no longer live with the organised labour movement. That we had 13 million people in trade unions. I have read and written a little bit, but read a lot about the history of the Italian trade unions in the factories in the 1970s. We had everything you had. It just was done in a very English way, and we had no Tony Negri or Mario Tronti. We had no autonomists to write it down. Who wrote it down were Leninists, and they, I think, misunderstood what was happening. We had the conga lines through through the factories, permanent occupations, permanent workers' control. We had all of that, and of course, in the miners, we had 250,000 highly politicised trade unionists living in very close-knit communities where, in the end, when they were defeated, had to be militarily occupied. So Thatcher decided we have to smash this. We cannot run a capitalism without destroying it. What's the only way to destroy 13 million trade unionists? Deindustrialise the country. And so in 1980-81, she purposely exacerbated the recession to a scale that shattered many working class communities then. Not in 85, not in 95, in 81. And the effect of this, I think, was long-lasting. Let's put it this way, long-lasting. Because by the mid-90s, neoliberalism could no longer go on smashing up communities. It had to give people something, and what it gave them was credit. It gave them very cheap credit to live on. And so what was created, the ideal, as I think it's Foucault who says this, the ideal, what neoliberalism creates as the ideal citizen is someone who is eminently governable. Our fathers had been ungovernable. What neoliberalism created was a governable working class, like this, in small towns, very impoverished, very low skilled, very atomised. But if you read my account there's an account here of my book chapter about my childhood in this town called Lee, which is near Manchester, they had a kind of progressive xenophobia. What I mean by that was they survived for 150 years as an industrial community by throwing stones at people they didn't recognise. Because the only reason for that person to be in the town was to come and take your job, break your strike, foreclose on your debts. In the 1930s, strangers came and dragged furniture out of people's houses to pay their debts. So mining communities throw stones at strangers. My father and grandfather's generation knew acutely the weakness of this progressive xenophobia, which is without the class dynamic, it's just xenophobia. That's why they absolutely, they also had historical knowledge. They absolutely fanatically fought fascism. They had no, my granddad certainly was illiterate, but his fight against fascism was of an instinctive nature. If they take away from us solidarity, all we have left is our small town. So what happened over that 15 years is that gradually those small towns got eviscerated. But the problem is about defeating an entire class at once in a very sharp way. They don't die. They get old, they get very sick. If you were to come to my town and ask for people who were in my class at school, you'd find elderly people. Exactly the same age as me, 59. They would look 79. But they are still alive. And the choice that was facing them for many years was live with this shit. Yeah? But and after 2008, they realised we don't have to live with this shit anymore. It's going. It's evaporating. And the choice facing them was how to fight it. And what happened, of course, was the use by the Blair government of it enthusiastically embraced European migration, of which many of you here are part and welcome. In a small town like that, it doesn't seem so great, because all it does is it creates extra demand for the doctors, extra demand for the school. The deserted church fills up with people, because I'm Catholic and I was came from a Catholic background, and our church was empty and now it's full. But it kind of makes you think, well, the question they asked is, what stake do you have in the society? And this, by and large, didn't matter what the Polish migrants and the Lithuanian migrants said they had the stake in society. The point was that the ruling class said none. They're the ideal governable subject. They have no vote. They work for very cheap wages. They are better than you, and they have no desire to overturn our cars and throw us into the canal like your grandfather did. So we like them, was the message. And I'm afraid, I think, over and above the natural disappointment of an imperialist, colonialist white working class, which is what I grew up in, at seeing their country go down and down and down, it was that, not some kind of simple arithmetic about wages, because the wages story is barely discernible, the impact on wages. It was the idea of what it's doing to citizenship. So that drove right-wing xenophobia. And so by 2014, we get 4 million votes for UKIP. In my town, it's been Labour since 1921. It always was Labour 80%, Conservative 20%, maybe Liberals somewhere in the middle, a few percent. In 2010, it went Labour 60, Conservative 20, UKIP 20. And when UKIP collapsed after the Brexit vote, it went Labour 60, Conservative 40. So what happened is a section of the working class made a choice, which was to go to the right, go to xenophobia, white racism. I think that's going to take us another generation to defeat. But then some very interesting things began to happen, because we had succession after succession of Labour leaders who were bought into, signed up to neoliberalism. Blair, Brown, we lost the election 2010. We could have easily won 2015, but we had yet another unimaginative, technocratic, you're quite used to such politicians in Italy, person who didn't get it, didn't understand what had gone wrong. And so when Ed Miliband loses the 2014 election, Corbynism is, I think, the only option, and we'll come to what the constituent parts of it are. But before we do that, I want to just really emphasise the importance of Scotland. Scotland, 6 million people. How many people in this room have been to Scotland? Good. Most English people have never been to Scotland. It's a small part of the United Kingdom, but of course it had already a long intellectual history, different from England, separate legal system, separate education system, and of course during the neoliberal era, whereas some of these white working class communities where I come from in the north of England went to the right, Scotland went massively to the left, but in a nationalist or independentist way, very similar to Catalonia. And I know it well, I know both of them well, they're very similar. And the Scottish story became completely fused with the idea of a progressive, independent, Scandinavian type economy. That's the project. Now, Labour can, because we are an imperialist country, and if you've been to Scotland, I hope you've also been to Essex, to out where we call it white flight, where white working class people moved when this city became multi-ethnic. There you will find the old East End culture of the boxing clubs and organised crime. And look, I'm part of that working class, and I hope to understand that that is also part of me, even if I don't like it. But just as much as the Scots chose, really, I mean, the 2014 independence referendum was 45% for independence. If they could have barred 60-year-olds and older from voting, it will be independent today. What that means is in 20 years' time, it will be independent. English people are not stupid. They can see this. Even though their intelligentsia are telling them, that's it, it's over, it's all gone. It's not gone. And then, this is how it worked out. First of all, for the right, you had the right saying, the plebeian right, the Conservatives and the kind of UKIP type people, well, if the Scots want independence, we must define an English nationalism. We'll come to this in a minute, but that was an important, that's an unexplored problem for us on the left. But the immediate problem was, people realised the only way Labour can now win an election, short of a miracle, is if it wins an election in England and forms a coalition government with the SNP. Now, not all my comrades in Labour understand or accept this, but I do understand it, that we could form a very small majority government in Britain with Labour in power, but you really, to do lasting change, are going to need to take that enormous force in Scotland, which, remember, they lost seats in the last election, 2017, only because there was tactical voting between Conservative and Labour voters against them. You cannot form a progressive government of lasting change in Britain without you take that Scottish nationalist movement inside that government. Now, the English electorate understood this, and a lot of them didn't like it. They weren't ready for it. And so that's why we lost, I think, in 2015 in the general election. And then what happened is, by now there's two very clear demographics. And if, as a political scientist, if I answer what is Corbynism, it is two demographics. Or rather, it's three demographics, but two are really important politically. One is the survivors from the 1980s. I am a survivor from the 1980s. The first picket line I stood on as a student was in 1980, on 14th of February, Valentine's Day. I remember it because it was the first use of riot shields in an industrial dispute in Britain, in Sheffield. Took part in the miners' strike, took part in the print strike as a leftist, joined the Labour Party. The first Labour conference I went to was the one in Blackpool, where Tony Benn, the leader of the left, stood up and made this incredible speech. I can still see even now the whites of his eyes popping out when he just demanded the wholesale nationalisation of the economy, planning, and the abolition of the House of Lords and the monarchy. We were very shocked. But look, we are survivors from that generation. I would say probably half of the membership of the Labour Party is like that. Older people last until they're 90 now, and if you were involved, as I was, in those strikes and the killing of anti-fascist protesters by the police, all these things that happen, which many, I think, in a way, in the Italian political space, are seen as a kind of ancient history, but for us are a living history, and that is what people said, look, right, now it's worth joining. Now we're on a roll. It's quite clear that neoliberals are going to lose control of Labour. We join, we take control. But alongside us, then, were the 2011 movement, the student movement, 2010 actually, December 2010, the three big student demos in this city, which were incredible. As a veteran of many riots, which I took part in before I became a journalist and covered them, I covered the student riot of December 2010, and many people concur with that. I have never seen more fierce street fighting on the streets of Britain than between the students and the Metropolitan Police riot squad. Not the fighting of the Brixton riots and the inner city riots was more prolonged, but the fierceness was intense. So you knew in 2010, 2011, this generation were not going to go back into a box. When we went into the rooms where they were occupying in the colleges, on the floor was at college we studied mainstream social democracy. We studied kind of mainstream ideas. On the floor for them is Fanon, Foucault, Marx, Trotsky, not so much Trotsky, Negri definitely. You know what I mean? There is a whole industry of autonomes here in Britain now that never existed before 2010, 2011. The ideas of the autonome movement went mainstream, and in one of the books I wrote called Why It's Kicking Off Everywhere, I tried to look at the mass colonization of identity of autonomist and anarchist ideas among youth. But now, where are they now? They are all branch secretaries, junior MPs, candidates, organisers, momentum organisers inside Labour. So the two sets of people that make up Corbynism are those, and it is, as anybody who's studied the revolution knows, that is the classic demographic of a defeated revolution. Old people and young people. The middle people, who all got taken out, who were all pro-Blair, they were all functionaries at the BBC with me. My bosses at the BBC used to shout at me across the newsroom, Paul, the middle way is best. They used to shout at me, the middle way is best. They were all, but they would move in the 1990s and 2000s between the BBC, advice to ministers, business. You can find them, they're in public life. They're missing from Corbynism. They don't believe it. They have drunk the Kool-Aid. So that's what Corbynism is demographically. Now, as a project, what did it... Let's do some results and prospects. What does it achieve? And what's wrong with it? It wasn't easy to take over the Labour Party. I can't, off the top of my head, around about 140,000 people joined to support Corbyn, because the right said the best way to stop the left is to get everybody in the public just to join the party. Then we stop the unions having a special impact. But who joined were people like me. I mean, I was already a member, but people like me joined. But from 2015 to the referendum in 2016, Corbyn didn't control the national executive, he didn't control the HQ, and the number of MPs who supported him was 24 maximum, out of 220. Then after the referendum campaign, we can discuss what went wrong in the referendum campaign. I want to dwell on it here. But obviously our impulse was, in the Scottish referendum, the British elite said, Labour, you go to Scotland and defend the British Union Constitution. We did, and we were slaughtered in the next election. So we said, we're not going to do that this time. If you want to stay in the European Union, you defend it. We'll do our own thing. But that didn't work, and that was probably a mistake. But the outcome was, then after there was this coup against Corbyn. So 170 MPs tried to kick him out. The ministers resigned. I sat in his office where in the summer of the last 2 weeks of the parliamentary session, they had to literally scrape people they'd never heard of and pick them up and put them on the front bench to be shadow ministers. Otherwise they could have lost the official opposition designation to the SNP itself. Even then, in the coup, the National Executive tried to put Corbyn off the ballot paper. He's leader, but he's off the ballot paper. So did the MPs. Everything was done to try and destroy him, but he didn't. And the significant thing is, because they tried to rule out lots of new people who had joined, as a result, lots of new people joined despite that. And the real membership surge for Corbyn takes place after the coup of June 2016. So, by 2017, Labour is a mass party now of 500,000 people. It's the biggest social democratic mass party. And the final nail in the coffin, from the point of view of the neoliberals, was going to be that there would be an election and we would lose the election. That's why they started to resign as MPs, to Tristram Hunt from Stoke-on-Trent, triggering a by-election, which we were supposed to lose, and we only won very barely. But the miracle of 2017 happened. We were really on 24%. We were really on 24%. That wasn't a lie. And we went from 24% to 40% in 6 weeks. And we could discuss why, but what I think the reason was at that time is, first of all, because of British electoral law, the TV news finally had to give Corbyn equal say. Until then, you would get TV programme would be Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, but no Corbyn supporter. It's very strange. Okay, this is why this MP Jess Phillips gets on everything, because she is so anti-Corbyn, but you just ring her up and she comes on. But in an election, the person representing Labour has to be Labour, not just someone who hates Corbyn, someone who likes him. And that, plus exposure to people, plus the fact that these horrendous terrorist attacks that took place during the election played very badly for Theresa May, because she cut the police so badly, I think created a mood of change. However, it's also true, and I am one of the people who I pushed as far as I could, and in fact risked my membership of Labour to push for a progressive alliance in that election. That is, we wanted a formal progressive deal between the Greens and the two nationalist parties, SNP Plaid, to try and swap votes at a local level. That didn't happen, but I think in retrospect, and the pollsters can show you this, that what happened is that had a big, there was a big spontaneous attempt by voters to just vote for any party that would defeat the Tories. And that's why I think Labour did so well, including in Scotland, where it clawed back 6 seats. Now, coming to the end, where are we now with Corbynism? Since the 2017 election, obviously the gamble was that Brexit would happen, that the Conservatives had a majority, they would be forced to do a soft form of Brexit, and Labour would vote against it and it would happen. But in June 2018, with the Chequers deal, when they published the final form of Brexit, it became clear that, as what I say this on every interview, no form of Brexit that is possible is acceptable to those who want Brexit. That is the fundamental contradiction. There are forms of Brexit that are possible because of the balance of forces between us and the European Union, but none of them are acceptable to people who want Brexit. And at that point, I had gone along with the idea of enacting Brexit in a soft way. I always wanted a Norway-style deal. Try and do Norway. If you can't do that, resist, and then just say to the Tories, it's your problem. From June 2018 onwards, it became clear that we could actually stop Brexit. And that's where I think some of the contradictions within inside Corbynism came into the fore. Because I said there are two demographics. There are also there are probably three politics, and they don't match the demographics at all. One, quite importantly, and I don't want to offend anybody here who is a Stalinist, but one is Stalinism. The traditional communist tradition of Britain was small but very influential because of the General Strike, because of the Spanish Civil War, because of Second World War, when the Communist Party did crazy things in all those positions but ended up benefiting from them historically. And so as a result, not so much belief in the Soviet Union, though you will still find it, but there is a quite strong belief in Putin ideology. The white helmets are all CIA. All of this is quite strong. As the veneration of Assad, veneration of Maduro, it's strong. It's not mass, but it's a strong current. Now, that's one current that I think was quite happy to sit there saying, okay, we have to do Brexit. What was its response when it became possible to defeat Brexit? Actually, we're really in favour of Brexit. Now, you see that in the Morning Star newspaper. Morning Star newspaper is the Communist Party's newspaper, but it's paid for by Unite, by GMB, and it's written in by Labour MPs close to Corbyn. I don't agree with them. So that's one current. The second thing is that I would say 80% of Labour members are urban, city, educated, salaried workers. Now, in some countries, say Germany, that doesn't even qualify to be working class. The Germans don't believe white-collar workers are part of the proletariat. I do. To me, that is the proletariat in Britain, the educated, salaried working class. Labour's base is that they overwhelmingly want to defeat Brexit, have a second referendum, and remain. And the politics that underpin that, I would say John McDonnell, as the Shadow Chancellor, is emblematic of that kind of politics, but it's a class politics. It's not a kind of pro-European thing where all these kind of FBPE people on the Twitter, proudly Brexit, fuck Brexit, whatever it's called. So that's the base of it all, and then there's quite a strong green, left, autonomist, feminist, youthful group inside Labour, which tends to be, interestingly enough, almost from an ultra left position, agnostic on Brexit. There's lots of kind of people from the 2011 generation who don't give a shit whether Brexit happens or not, because to them it's all capitalism. Now, I would say Corbynism, if it existed, was the idea of getting Jeremy Corbyn into power. And to conclude, I would say, in this period, this is my argument with the remains of the far left. I believe the most revolutionary thing you can do is get a government committed to dismantling neoliberalism. It would feel so revolutionary here. In Italy, it would be even from the left, even more revolutionary because of Lisbon and Maastricht. But in Britain, because of a historical accident, it looks like it's possible to do that. I think it's possible, and that's what the project has to be. And therefore, we have to try and herd the sheep or the cats together into a group that goes through the gate marked a Labour left government. And that's not easy because a lot of them don't agree with each other and they don't like to be herded. I think the weaknesses of Corbynism are, in fact, its lack of an ideology. All we have left are the old ideologies we grew up with, whether it's the autonomism of the 2011 generation or the Stalinism of some. I was a Trotskyist in the 1980s. Most of the British left was Trotskyist in the 80s rather than anything else. And the Benism, the old Benite, stateized, the solution is to nationalise everything. The problem is we never created an ideology with a political cascade of political education and culture. In fact, when I use the word cultural or ideological hegemony, which hopefully everybody in this room knows because of Antonio Gramsci, in the British Labour movement this is quite a foreign concept. People don't know what it is, why you might want to do it, what might be. We don't have a theoretical background. And those of you involved in the PD or the Rifondazione or whatever will know about all these Archie groups that happened in Italy in the 1970s, the self-educated groups. You were quite ahead of many of the labour movements in the world. We were not. And we are now paying the price for the failure to have a political education. How? First of all, because I think the Stalinist voice within Labour is too strong. It's tiny, but it's dictating what's going on. There's almost kind of a conflict inside the shadow cabinet between largely socially liberal people who represent cities and largely socially, not conservative, but traditional people who represent small towns. That's within Corbynism. And that would have been more easily sorted out had we said, what do we stand for? The other problem that doesn't help is the anti-Semitism debate. Now, I think a lot of the attacks on us are actually smears and slanders. I think that is true because the far right the right-wing press is organising this. But it's also true that it hasn't been handled well, and it's not just a question of administratively handling it badly, it's the failure to understand what it was, and I include myself here. I mean, I am 1/4 Jewish, and therefore at my Catholic school I thought I experienced a kind of mild form of anti-Semitism, when it was known my grandfather's Jewish. But what we're dealing with is a newer form of anti-Semitism, which maps onto populism in the way that in its most worst form, which is the elite. The elite are identified with big business, finance, and it becomes not a systemic critique of capitalism, but a personal critique of the elite. And then it's very easy then to lay on top of that the anti-Semitic tropes. Now, we were slow to see that, and I would include myself in that. But worse than that, when it comes to fighting it, if you want to fight this, you don't go out and simply say, we need to fight anti-Semitism, you have to say, look, all this bullshit that you're being fed by Putin and Assad is also bullshit. The source of all trolling and disinformation is ultimately bad actors in the world, and you need to recognise them. And the problem is we've ended up without an ideology that can teach people how to judge what's wrong with some internet meme. And that is probably, we have to do a mea culpa and say it's all our faults, but it's the problem of Britain, as you know if you live here. You come from an intellectualised culture, and that has really sometimes quite negative impacts. I think when Negri and Bifo and everybody got together in a meeting 2 years ago, someone stood up and said, "You've done fucking nothing for 20 years." That's the critique of them. Our critique of us is we've done a lot, but we don't have any ideas that underpin it, and that is going to be difficult going forward. I think I don't make any predictions, but I think that what we've achieved will not go away. The dream of the right is to destroy Corbyn and it goes away. Actually, if they destroy Corbyn, probably what comes next is something slightly softer, but something more inclusive. But don't think that's going to be better for the elite, because, as I said before, the point is to take their hands off the levers of power. And I think that we can take their hands off the levers of power with a 500,000 strong movement, with, again, even though 5, 6, 7 million trade unionists. If you're a trade unionist in Britain today, you know about it, you know you're a trade unionist, quite a conscious movement. And then on top of that, all these amazing movements of youth that haven't gone away. Extinction Rebellion is one, Me Too is another. There's been numerous movements of young people around individual issues or issues of oppression. Out of that, I think it'd be very possible to build a really big hegemonic movement. But the Labour movement and Labour Party has to want to do hegemony as a strategy. And the problem is, the really weird thing, if you want the final bit of the history lesson, is that our Gramscians became the Blairites. It may not be obvious to you, but from our equivalent of Eurocommunism came Blairism, and that all we are left with on the Marxist side of things is Trotskyism and Stalinism, and kind of both sets of them really don't want to do hegemony. They want to do class against class. They want to do the third period. Although they don't even know what the third period is, they want to do that. And my battle inside Labour is to try and educate people. Please join and help us and take part in these debates. Educate people that the working class has to represent the nation and can do so in a progressive way, or nations, if it's Scotland, Ireland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland. It can represent it in a progressive way if it is emotionally intelligent towards the things that are driving the right-wing populist or plebeian conservatism, as I prefer to call it. We can actually do that, and the challenge for me is to win an intellectual battle inside the Labour left to want to do it. And we could maybe discuss it, because I have more knowledge than you would even want to know historically about why it is the British working class has been so encumbered with anti-intellectualism. But that's my kind of short history lesson of where we are. But I'm sure you've all got questions, and you'll all want to talk about Brexit. But so I will cease speaking right now.
Thank you, Paul.